Hey rich girls, Kirby here. And did you know that we are currently undergoing one of the largest wealth transfers in modern history? This is a Rich Girl's Guide, where we demystify the world of personal finance to help you create a financially successful and fulfilling life. I'm Kirby, a former wealth management 9-to-5er, and I was listening to a podcast a few weeks back. I know, shocker, I am a huge podcast fan, and one of my favorites for keeping up to date on finance and money trends is the Wall Street Journal's Your Money Briefing. Let me play a quick clip from this episode about the biggest wealth transfer in modern history.
Baby boomer women are leading one of the biggest wealth transfers in modern history, and they're now deciding the fate of trillions of dollars.
We're really starting to see this shift where women who are in their 60s and 70s are finding themselves in control of their family's finances, whether it's due to divorce or the passing away of a spouse. And that's pretty significant because 50 years ago, this same generation of women weren't even allowed to open credit cards in their name or own their own home.
Yes, you heard that right. Only 50 years ago, women were not allowed to own their own home or open a credit card in their own name. We're going to dive into the specifics of these statements, how women coming into wealth are choosing to shake up the financial landscape, and what we can do to ensure that 50 years from now, women are even further along than we are right now. The first question I really wanted to answer was this: are women really deciding the fate of trillions of dollars? Short answer, yes. We most certainly are. Currently, women over the age of 60 control $8 trillion in liquid assets, aka cash, stocks, and bonds, and it's been reported that nearly $40 trillion will be transferred to women over the next few decades. That is a lot of financial power being handed to a generation of women that was born in a time when they had very little financial power. Let's back it up a step and find out when exactly women gained the first right to handle their own finances. I first wanted to find out what was up with this whole credit card situation. Could women really not gain access to credit in their own name just 50 years ago? Guys, the research here was truly shocking to me. Essentially, this statement refers to the Fair Credit Opportunity Act, and that was signed into law in 1974, which made it illegal for banks to discriminate against women, because apparently it was illegal before that. According to an article in Kiplinger, quote, banks were legally allowed to deny women credit or charge them higher interest if they failed to get a male cosigner. Married women were denied credit regardless of their income, and single women were denied loans or were given smaller amounts than single men with identical financial backgrounds. The article then goes on to say that this law only applied to personal lines of credit. It was not until 14 years later in 1988, yes, you heard that right, literally 6 years before I was born, that women gained this same right to credit within their businesses. Quote, until the Women's Business Ownership Act was signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1988, women in some states were still required to have male relative cosigners when they opened business lines of credit. I just want that to sink in for a second for two main reasons. First off, can I just say the fact that women-owned businesses have come such a long way in such a short amount of time is absolutely mind-boggling. The effing hoops that women before us had to jump through is honestly unfathomable to me. Just having a small business and maintaining very simple, very basic things has been honestly quite challenging for me, and I think a lot of other small business owners feel the same way. So thinking about the fact that if I were trying to do this 40 years ago, I would also have the added pressure of potentially being turned down by a bank for a business line of credit solely because of the fact that I have a vagina is infuriating, and again, it's almost unfathomable to me. It's hard to even put myself in that headspace because it just seems so distant, and yet this only happened 6 years before I was born. So Kudos to those motherfucking female business owners and women in government who fought for our rights to allow women like me to have a more even playing field against my male counterparts. The second reason I really want you to think about this is look how far we've come in the past 40 years. And think about how much further we could take it in the next 40 years. Like, if you think about it, we really only had less than 4 decades of somewhat unencumbered growth potential for female business owners. And the reason I say somewhat unencumbered is because there has still been a lot of social taboo around women looking a certain way, talking a certain way, presenting themselves a certain way in business. Even being a working mother warrants inappropriate questions from coworkers or family members that working fathers would never in a million years get asked. And I think it's really only been these past 6, 7, maybe 8 years that we've seen a true turnaround in what it can look like to be a raunchy, in-your-face kind of feminist business owner that also makes real money. And I just think that Alex Cooper is the perfect example for this. She is someone who came from a middle-class background, received some virality on a podcast early on in her 20s as a single female, and was able to turn that into a multi-million-dollar empire that now spans several different industries. Can you see I'm excited? This would not have been possible 40 years ago. I cannot even begin to explain how excited that makes me for these next 40 years. They have the potential to bring about huge changes for women in business, and I think that starts with women utilizing this wealth transfer to help lift up other women. What if just a small fraction of this $40 trillion were invested into educational resources for women? What if there were endowments established for high-achieving females to attend business school? Resources for girls who are born into unsafe living situations to have access to healthcare, hot meals, or mentorship programs with women who were born into similar circumstances and made it out. What about establishing programs and funding programs that help women get their first business off the ground? How can women utilize this wealth transfer to help lift up other women? This is just some food for thought. It's something I've been thinking about a lot as a mother myself of 2 young daughters. Of course, I want to educate my own daughters on personal finance as they get older, and I want to be a good example for them. And part of that is by being charitable and giving back in ways that help other women and other girls. They are growing up in a generation where they get to see female principals leading their school. They get to see stay-at-home dads being chaperones on field trips. They get to see moms who own their own businesses. Now, we haven't actually done this yet, but once they get a little bit older, I'd love to sit my kids down and show them their investment accounts that are in their own names, discuss what a mutual fund is, what a stock is, what the tax consequences are of buying and selling those in different types of accounts. All that fun stuff that I find fascinating. We'll also discuss the fact that once they reach a certain age, they will have control over those investments and they can start their own business or buy their first piece of investment property. This is going to be a whole new generation of financially literate female leaders, and I cannot wait to see what they accomplish. Something else that the Your Money Briefing podcast brought up was the fact that women tend to invest differently than men. Let's take a listen.
Women tend to invest with more of a focus on protecting capital by holding stable assets and bonds with long-duration yields. But that's not always the case. I spoke with a woman named Janet who lives in Florida in a country club community. And when her husband died in 1993, half of his money went to her and the other half went with his 3 children. She put about 60% of that money in stocks and 40% in fixed income. But since then, she's actually gotten more aggressive, putting 80% of that money in stocks. And she says it's because she owns 2 homes, she has remarried, she feels really comfortable in the assets that she does have. So why not ride the stock market all the way?
So essentially, women like to gamble less than men. Shocker. Jokes aside, they actually go on to say that as women learn more about investing and spend time in the stock market, they can actually become less conservative with their investments, which can be a good thing, especially if you want your capital to grow and not be outpaced by inflation over time. What this means to me is that women, especially older women who may not have received a formal financial education, need to learn the basics about investing and the stock market in order to be comfortable investing their money. I have so many ideas rolling around my head. Lots of big picture ideas that I would love to see come to fruition, but I think it all comes back to teaching young girls about money and investing early on so that it just becomes part of their everyday vocabulary. In the next 50 years, one of my biggest hopes is that instead of hearing that women came into wealth because of the death of a spouse, which is definitely the messaging coming from all of these recent articles and even this podcast episode that I've been referencing, we instead hear that women chose to spend their hard-earned wealth on X, Y, and Z. I hope that in the future, when we see a wealthy woman walking down the street with a Chanel bag and designer shoes, or we see a woman driving an Aston Martin, we whisper to our partner, I wonder what kind of business she owns. I envision a world where matriarchs of the family are the ones who paved their own path, made their own money, and utilized their wealth to help empower other women and girls. And family members and friends come to them for guidance and business advice. All right, before we go, ladies, I want to know your thoughts on all of this. Were you taught anything about money or investing growing up? Was your mom a business owner? Were you raised in a way that made you think earning money was meant for men, or were you encouraged to be financially independent? I'm really curious to see how other people grew up and were taught about this kind of thing. So please share your story below because I would love to know. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to rate and review this podcast wherever you listen and subscribe to Rich Girls Guide on YouTube. I will have a brand new episode out for you next Monday. I'm not going to be doing every single Monday episodes. It just so happens to be that most Mondays coming up, I do have a new episode. So till then, have an incredible and productive week. Later, Rich Girls.